The Wemmer Pan Killer, the Cedric Maake story. In the heart of South Africa's economic capital, Johannesburg, lies a small recreational area known as Wemmer Pan. By day, it's a peaceful lake surrounded by parkland where families gather for picnics and children play. But in the mid-1990s, this tranquil setting would become synonymous with terror. Between 1996 and 1997, a series of brutal murders would shatter the peace of this community and earn one man a chilling nickname that would forever link him to this place. This is the story of Maoupa Cedric Maake, known to the world as the Wemmer Pan Killer. The mid-1990s marked a pivotal time in South African history. Just 2 years after the end of apartheid and Nelson Mandela's election as the country's first black president, the nation was still grappling with the social and economic upheaval that comes with such massive political transformation. Johannesburg, the country's largest city and economic hub, was experiencing unprecedented urbanization as people from rural areas flocked to the city seeking opportunities that had long been denied to them. In this environment of change and uncertainty, crime rates were soaring. The South African Police Service, newly reformed from the apartheid-era force, was struggling to adapt to democratic policing while dealing with an explosion of violent crime. It was in this context that one man would embark on a killing spree that would terrorize the city and challenge investigators' ability to track and capture a serial killer. Maoupa Cedric Maake was born in South Africa, though the exact details of his early childhood remain largely unknown. What we do know is that tragedy struck early in his life. His father died while Maake was in Standard 8, what is now known as Grade 10, a devastating loss that would reshape his future. Rather than continuing his education, the young Maake made the difficult decision to leave school and help care for his family. Like so many young South Africans seeking economic opportunity, Maake eventually made his way to Johannesburg. The sprawling metropolis offered what rural areas could not, the possibility of steady work and a better life. He learned the trade of plumbing and established himself as a self-employed tradesman, a respectable profession that provided him with both income and the mobility that would later prove crucial to his crimes. By his early 30s, Maake appeared to be living a relatively stable life. He had a wife and 4 children back in Limpopo province, maintaining ties to his rural roots while building a new life in the city. In Johannesburg, he had established a relationship with a girlfriend and was living in La Rochelle, a suburb in the southern part of the city. To those who knew him, he seemed like just another working man trying to make his way in post-apartheid South Africa. It was in 1996, when Maake was 33 years old, that something changed. Without any apparent trigger or warning sign, this seemingly ordinary plumber began a descent into violence that would make him one of South Africa's most notorious serial killers. What drove this transformation remains a mystery. There was no obvious catalyst, no traumatic event that investigators could point to as the moment Maoupa Cedric Maake became a killer. The killing spree that would define Maake's legacy began in April 1996 in the area around Wemmer Pan. This recreational area, with its lake and surrounding parkland, attracted joggers, couples, and families looking for a peaceful escape from the urban chaos of Johannesburg. But it was precisely this isolation and the vulnerability of people seeking solitude that would make it the perfect hunting ground for a predator. The murders around Wemmer Pan followed distinct patterns that would later help investigators understand Maake's methodology. His first group of victims were solitary individuals, men and women walking alone in the area, whom he would approach and bludgeon to death with rocks. The brutality was shocking. These were not quick clinical killings, but savage beatings that demonstrated an extraordinary level of violence. The second pattern was even more disturbing. Maake began targeting couples who had driven to the Wemmer Pan area seeking privacy. His method was coldly systematic. He would assault both victims, shoot the men dead, and rape the women. These attacks showed a level of planning and predatory behavior that suggested this was not random violence, but calculated hunting. What made these crimes particularly challenging for investigators was that the attacks seemed random and motiveless. There was no apparent connection between the victims beyond their presence in the Wemmer Pan area. They came from different backgrounds, different racial groups, different economic circumstances. The only common thread was their vulnerability and their proximity to what had become a killing field. While the Wemmer Pan murders were terrorizing the southern suburbs, a different but equally violent pattern was emerging in Johannesburg's inner city. Beginning in late 1996, a series of brutal attacks on shopkeepers, particularly tailors, began to unfold in the downtown area. The weapon of choice was always the same, a hammer. On December 28, 1996, Antonio Alfonso was working in Hill Gardens Cafe on High Street in Rosettenville when Maake entered without warning and attacked him with a hammer. Alfonso survived the brutal assault, but Maake made off with 400 rand from the cash register, money he would later use to celebrate the new year, a chilling detail that demonstrated his complete lack of remorse. The attacks escalated in January 1997. On January 6th, Maake entered a shop owned by Magan Kanji and struck him with a shifting spanner until he lost consciousness, stealing 5 pairs of trousers. 2 days later, he bludgeoned Kenny Chan with a hammer and stole money from the till. The pattern was becoming clear. Maake would enter small businesses, usually operated by single individuals, attack them with blunt instruments, and steal whatever cash or goods he could find. What had begun as brutal robberies soon escalated to murder. Kantalal Lutchman was struck with a hammer in his tailor shop, his wallet stolen as he lay dying. Abdul Bulbulia in Newtown suffered a similar fate. But it was the murder of Dansuklal Patel that marked a clear escalation in Maake's violence. Patel, bludgeoned with a hammer, managed to survive long enough to reach the hospital, but died from his injuries, officially becoming Maake's first acknowledged murder victim. These inner-city murders revealed another disturbing aspect of Maake's methodology. He specifically targeted small business owners, particularly those working alone in vulnerable locations. Many of his victims were immigrants or members of minority communities who had established small shops and tailoring businesses in Johannesburg's inner city. These were hard-working individuals trying to build a life in the new South Africa, only to become prey for a killer who saw them as easy targets. For the Brixton Murder and Robbery Unit of the South African Police Service, the unit primarily responsible for investigating serial killers in the Johannesburg area, these crimes presented an unprecedented challenge. Initially, investigators did not connect the Wemmer Pan murders with the inner-city hammer attacks. The differences in location, victim type, and methodology led them to believe they were dealing with 2 separate serial killers. 2 distinct criminal profiles were created, one for the Wemmer Pan murderer who targeted isolated individuals and couples, and another for the hammer killer who focused on small business owners. This separation of the investigation meant that the full scope of Maake's crimes was not immediately apparent, allowing him to continue killing while police chased what they believed were 2 different perpetrators. The investigation was further complicated by the nature of crime in 1990s Johannesburg. With violent crime rates soaring, police were overwhelmed with cases. Serial killing was still a relatively new phenomenon for South African law enforcement, and the resources and expertise needed to track such criminals were limited. The idea that one individual could be responsible for such a diverse range of violent crimes across different areas of the city seemed almost impossible to investigators. The breakthrough in the case came from an unexpected source and demonstrated the importance of methodical police work. The connection between the Wemmer Pan murders and the hammer killings was finally made by Superintendent Piet Bijleveld on January 12, 1998. Bijleveld, who would later become renowned as one of South Africa's most successful serial killer investigators, noticed a crucial detail that others had missed. When Maake was eventually arrested, he cooperated with police and led them to a pawn shop in La Rochelle where he had sold the bicycle belonging to Gerhard Levu, one of his Wemmer Pan victims, for 120 rand. The receipt showed that he had used the alias Patrick Mokoena for this transaction. This same alias had been used to check in a shirt at one of the tailor shops before Maake murdered the owner, the crucial link that connected the 2 seemingly separate crime sprees. This discovery revolutionized the investigation and revealed the true scope of Maake's crimes. What had seemed like the work of two different killers was actually the methodical campaign of one extremely dangerous individual who was comfortable operating across different areas of the city and adapting his methods to different types of victims. Cedric Maake was arrested in December 1997 as a suspect in the Wemmer Pan murders. In what would prove to be an unusual aspect of this case, Maake initially acknowledged responsibility for the crimes and showed a remarkable level of cooperation with investigators. This cooperation would prove invaluable in understanding the full extent of his activities. Maake accompanied police officers on several occasions, leading them around Johannesburg to point out the locations where he had committed his crimes. This macabre tour of violence provided investigators with crucial evidence and helped them understand the geographical patterns of his attacks. The data generated from these crime scene visits would later be used in groundbreaking ways. The Wemmer Pan serial killer case became one of the earliest examples of the South African Police Service using Geographic Information Systems, GIS, and crime mapping technology in court prosecution. Geographic profiling of Maake's crimes revealed a clear pattern. The majority of his murders were centered around his two residences, his workplace, and the homes of his brother and girlfriend. This analysis demonstrated that even seemingly random crimes often follow geographical patterns linked to the perpetrator's daily life. As the investigation continued and more evidence came to light, the full scope of Maake's crimes became apparent. He was eventually charged with 36 counts of murder, 28 attempted murders, 15 counts of rape, 46 counts of aggravated robbery, and numerous other offenses related to the unlawful possession of firearms and ammunition. The sheer number of charges painted a picture of a man who had embarked on an extended campaign of violence across Johannesburg. 1 month after his arrest, Maake confessed to the Hammer murders, finally providing the confirmation that investigators needed to link all of these crimes to a single perpetrator. This confession helped police close numerous cases and provided closure to families who had been waiting for answers about their loved ones' deaths. When Maake's case went to trial, he adopted a legal strategy that seemed to contradict his earlier cooperation with police. Despite having confessed to numerous crimes and having led investigators to crime scenes, he pleaded not guilty to all charges. This decision meant that prosecutors would have to prove each charge individually, relying on the substantial evidence they had gathered during the investigation. The trial became a showcase for modern investigative techniques. The GIS mapping and geographical profiling that had been used in the investigation were presented as evidence, marking one of the first times such technology had been used in a South African courtroom. The case demonstrated how traditional detective work could be enhanced by modern analytical tools to build an overwhelming case against a serial killer. On September 6, 2000, justice was finally served. Cedric Maake was convicted of 27 murders, 26 attempted murders, 14 rapes, 41 aggravated robberies, and numerous other serious offenses. In total, he was found guilty on 114 of the 134 charges brought against him, a conviction rate that reflected the overwhelming evidence against him. The sentencing was as extraordinary as the crimes themselves. Judge President Bernard Ngwepe sentenced Maake to 27 life sentences, one for each murder he had committed, plus an additional 1,159 years and 3 months in prison. The total sentence amounted to 1,140 years behind bars, ensuring that Maake would never again pose a threat to society. This sentence was one of the longest ever imposed by a South African court and reflected both the severity of Maake's crimes and the judge's determination to ensure that justice was served for every victim. Each life sentence represented a person whose life had been cut short, a family that had been destroyed, a community that had been terrorized. Behind the statistics and legal proceedings were real people whose lives were cut short by Maake's violence. Antonio Alfonso, who survived the hammer attack at Hill Gardens Cafe, bore physical and psychological scars that would last a lifetime. Megan Kanji, beaten unconscious with a shifting spanner, was one of the fortunate few who lived to tell their story. Others were not so lucky. Dansuklal Patel, the tailor who died in hospital after being bludgeoned with a hammer, represented the hard-working immigrant community that Maake seemed to specifically target. Gerhard Levu, whose bicycle was sold to a pawn shop, was among the Wemmer Pan victims who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The couples who were attacked at Wemmer Pan had come seeking privacy and peace, only to encounter unimaginable violence. The women who survived the sexual assaults carried trauma that extended far beyond the physical injuries. Each victim represented a life with hopes, dreams, and families who would never be the same. The Maake case had a profound impact on South African law enforcement and became a template for future serial killer investigations. The use of geographic information systems and crime mapping technology that proved so successful in this case was adopted more widely by the South African Police Service. Superintendent Piet Billeveld, who made the crucial connection between the different crime scenes, went on to become one of South Africa's most respected serial killer investigators. The methodical approach used in the Maake investigation, combining traditional detective work with modern analytical tools, became a model for future cases. The case also highlighted the importance of not making assumptions about criminal behavior. The initial belief that the Wemmer Pan and Hammer murders were committed by different individuals demonstrated how criminal profiles, while useful, could sometimes lead investigators astray. The lesson learned was that serial killers could be far more adaptable and methodical than previously understood. The Maake case captured public attention not only because of the horrific nature of the crimes, but also because it challenged perceptions about serial killing in South Africa. The case was later featured in a 13-part Mnet television series called Criminal Minds, hosted by Malcolm Gooding, bringing the story to a wider audience and contributing to public understanding of serial crime. For the communities affected by Maake's crimes, the case served as both a conclusion and a cautionary tale. The areas around Wemmer Pan, once popular for recreation and relaxation, would forever be associated with violence and fear. Small business owners in Johannesburg's inner city had to grapple with the reality that their vulnerability had made them specific targets. Despite the comprehensive investigation and successful prosecution, many questions about Cedric Maake remain unanswered. What transformed a working plumber with a family into one of South Africa's most prolific serial killers? There was no apparent trigger, no traumatic event that investigators could identify as the catalyst for his violence. Maake's ability to maintain relationships with both a wife and a girlfriend while conducting his killing spree speaks to a level of compartmentalization that psychologists find both fascinating and disturbing. He could return home to his family after committing brutal murders, apparently showing no external signs of the violence he was perpetrating. The diversity of his victims, from isolated individuals at Wemmer Pan to busy shopkeepers in the inner city, suggests a predator who was constantly seeking new opportunities for violence. This adaptability, combined with his willingness to change methods and locations, made him particularly dangerous and difficult to track. The conviction of Cedric Maake brought closure to dozens of families who had lost loved ones to his violence, but it also raised important questions about crime prevention and community safety. How could a single individual commit so many crimes across such a wide area without being detected sooner? The case highlighted the importance of communication between different police units and the need for centralized databases that could identify patterns across multiple jurisdictions. The geographic profiling techniques that proved so valuable in solving the case are now standard tools in serial killer investigations worldwide. For the survivors of Maake's attacks, the conviction provided a measure of justice, but the trauma of their experiences would last a lifetime. Support services for victims of violent crime, still developing in post-apartheid South Africa, were put to the test by the sheer number of people affected by Maake's actions. The Maake case occurred during a period when South Africa was grappling with extraordinarily high rates of violent crime. The transition from apartheid to democracy had created social and economic upheaval that contributed to widespread criminality. In this context, even a serial killer as prolific as Maake could operate for over a year before being caught. The case also reflected the particular vulnerabilities of certain communities in post-apartheid South Africa. The targeting of small business owners, many of them immigrants, highlighted the precarious position of those trying to build new lives in an unstable environment. The attacks on couples seeking privacy in public spaces demonstrated how even basic freedoms could be compromised by violent crime. Today, more than 2 decades after his conviction, Cedric Maake remains in prison, serving his 1,340-year sentence. At 60 years old, he will never be released, ensuring that he can never again pose a threat to society. His case continues to be studied by criminologists and law enforcement professionals as an example of how traditional investigative techniques can be enhanced by modern technology. The areas where Maake committed his crimes have changed dramatically since the 1990s. Johannesburg has continued to evolve, with new security measures and community policing initiatives aimed at preventing the kind of predatory violence that Maake perpetrated. Yet the memory of his crimes serves as a reminder of how quickly a sense of safety can be shattered by a single individual's capacity for evil. The story of Cedric Maake is ultimately a story about the randomness of evil and the vulnerability of ordinary people going about their daily lives. His victims included couples seeking privacy, workers trying to earn a living, and individuals simply walking alone in what should have been safe spaces. The successful investigation and prosecution of this case demonstrated the importance of persistence, cooperation, and the willingness to embrace new technologies in the fight against crime. The work of investigators like Superintendent Piet Bijleveld showed that even the most complex and seemingly random crimes could be solved through methodical police work. But perhaps most importantly, the Maake case serves as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The survivors of his attacks, the families of his victims, and the communities he terrorized all found ways to rebuild and move forward, refusing to let one man's violence define their lives. Cedric Maake was convicted of 27 murders on September 6, 2000, and sentenced to 1,240 years in prison. He remains incarcerated and will never be eligible for release. This documentary is dedicated to the memory of his victims and to the survivors who found the courage to rebuild their lives after encountering unimaginable evil. The locations where these crimes occurred, Wemmer Pan, the streets of Johannesburg's inner city, the small shops where people worked to build a better life, have been reclaimed by the communities that refuse to let fear triumph over hope. In their resilience, we find the true victory over the darkness that Cedric Maake brought to their world. Amid the echoes of a nation rebuilding and the restless heartbeat of Johannesburg, Cedric Maake moved like a phantom, targeting shopkeepers, couples, and strangers with calculated brutality. In a city already scarred by history, he stitched fear into the everyday: a park stroll, a business transaction, a walk alone. But behind every charge was a name, a face, a life cut short. This isn't just the story of a killer. It's a reckoning for the silence that let him go unnoticed for so long. If this story disturbed you, informed you, or reminded you of how ordinary moments can mask extraordinary danger, please like, share, and subscribe to Weird World Wonders. We confront the darkness not to glorify monsters, but to honor the voices lost beneath their footsteps. Until next time, stay aware, stay grounded, and remember, sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who smile while fixing your pipes.